I am currently the state entomologist for the state of South Carolina. I'm also with the regulatory division at Clemson. I'm assistant director in that division, and we're in charge of basically regulating pesticides, fertilizers, plant movement, and any kind of invasive pests that may come into state. On the historical end of things, I'm the incoming president of the Pendleton Historic Foundation that has this house along with two others in town, and I'm on lots of other committees and boards dealing with history and preservation. Pendleton is a real jewel in South Carolina of a preserved town, a town that's really tried to preserve its character and its history. The more public involvement we can get in these preservation efforts, the better off we are, and the more we can involve younger generations.
I'm Devyn Whitmire. People from South Carolina, like myself, are proud of their state and everything it has to offer. But even we don't know every nook and cranny. So we're traveling to the most unique places in the Palmetto State. Some of them even we've never heard of. From Discover South Carolina, it's the Palmetto Porch. This time around, we explore Pendleton, South Carolina, a historic town in the Blue Ridge foothills, joined by historian and state entomologist Dr. Tim Drake, as he reveals Pendleton's unique cultural landscape and the area's larger historical significance. Sounds like you wear a lot of hats. For the folks at home, what is an entomologist?
Entomology is the study of insects. So there are many different aspects of entomology. Insects affect every aspect of our life and have since the beginning of humanity. So it's a very important discipline, and a lot of people don't really understand how insects are so influential in our lives and in social trends and in everything that we do, agriculture, food, the homes we live in, the clothes we wear. So it's a science that affects lots of different aspects of our life that we don't really even realize. So.
Yeah. So why did you get into that field? Was there something about it when you were growing up? Were you drawn to insects?
I always loved nature. Yeah. History and nature were two of my favorite things. And so my father was an entomologist. He graduated from Clemson in 1960 and had his own pest control business in Spartanburg. So after I got my degree, I was pre-med at Clemson to start out with. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of morphed into entomology and went into the business with my dad and decided I wanted to go back and get another degree. So I got a PhD in entomology and then went to work for the regulatory division at Clemson. So it's something that I hadn't really planned. It just sort of happened.
Yeah. Some of the best things in life are, right. Isn't that right? So what can you tell us about the indigenous history in and around Pendleton? Is there a connection with insects?
There very much is a connection with insects on several different fronts. The reason that Pendleton was settled by the lowcountry planters was because of the mosquito and because of the diseases they transmitted. The malaria and the yellow fever, of course, they didn't know in those days that the mosquitoes transmitted those. They just knew that they were prevalent around swamps. So they fled to the upcountry for the summers. If you were a planter in Charleston and you could not get your family out of Charleston or the surrounding areas, you sent them to the Sea Islands where there were breezes. So mosquitoes were a driving force in sending people from the low country here. Pendleton also had an early experimentation with the silk, producing silk. So the silk moth was brought here in the late 1700s. And there was somewhat of a little silk industry in Pendleton until the 1830s, and then it sort of died out. We had a series of freezes, and the worms didn't do too well, and the mulberry trees that they brought weren't really what they wanted, so they stopped the silk production. And then the last thing, a major insect issue here, was the boll weevil. The boll weevil came into Defusky Island about 1917. It was one of our first major destructive invasive species. It was probably the most invasive destructive species we've ever had in South Carolina. And it pretty much wiped out cotton crops across the state by the 1930s and almost single-handedly was responsible for the migration of thousands and thousands of people out of the state and out of agricultural production.
I had no idea. That is really interesting. So tell us a bit more about where we are today in Ashtabula. Walk us through the house and tell us what will people see?
Okay, Ashtabula, the name, it was given this name, we think, by the Gibbs family, and it actually means fish creek or fishing creek in the native language. A lot of the plantations in the upcountry and across South Carolina were named after Native American place names and thing names. So Ashtabula is your typical center hall. In Charleston, would have been called a double house because it has 4 rooms downstairs, 4 rooms upstairs with big hallways in between, and then shed rooms off the back. It was built for maximum air circulation. Have been lots of people here in the summertime, especially when the Adger family owned it, that were summering up here. So you might have 2 or 3 different families treating this sort of as a big summertime hotel. We actually, at Ashtabula, we have the earliest documented tavern in what was the old Pendleton district. It was built about 1790 to 92 by James Gassaway, and he received a tavern's license, actually, I think in 1791, and it still stands. And when the Gibbs family came up from Charleston, they actually lived in the tavern building and an old log house while they constructed this, and then it became a dependency. So we have an original kitchen out there. We have one room furnished as a tavern room. And then upstairs, we have a room furnished as if it were a lodging for someone traveling. And we also have a room furnished as a slave quarter because, a part of our history that we must acknowledge is that most of these wealthy families did have enslaved workers, and most of the work was done by them and not by the families themselves at this level of society. So we have a quarter or a room up there set up as a slave dwelling. And so we do have documentation that the house servants actually did live in that building. And so it's one of the last surviving intact slave dwellings in what was the old Pendleton district as well.
So it was a vacation home, right?
It was initially built by the Gibbses as a full-time residence. His father they were very wealthy Charleston rice planters, but Mr. Gibbs really didn't go into the planting profession. So he and his wife, who was Maria Drayton, she was from Drayton Hall, they moved up here, and this became a family farm. It was not a massive plantation like you had in the Low Country, but both of them died quite early on. There were several tragic deaths here. And the house passed on to families after that, the Adgers and others, who did use it as a summer residence.
And Pendleton is kind of known for some of its historic homes, right?
Yes, we have a good many antebellum homes in Pendleton that still stand. A lot of the grander homes that were built by the Low Country planters are now gone. Boscobel, Rivoli, and a lot of others, Altamont. But we do have this house. We have Woodburn Plantation House. There are several other plantation houses or summer homes that were built by the Low Country elite that still stand. Most of those are in private hands.
So Pendleton has a lot of history, but what makes Pendleton unique compared to maybe other historic towns in South Carolina?
I think Pendleton has, even with all the growth around us, there have been a lot of farms sold that are being developed now. So development is sort of the dearth of historic preservationists. But Pendleton has been able to maintain most of its historic character, that small town atmosphere, which makes it so desirable for folks to visit and live in. Pendleton has a lot of restaurants and a lot of places people can go and enjoy being together in the evenings. It still has its Old Town Square, so one of the few towns in South Carolina that still maintains its square, with Farmers Hall at the very center. The Pendleton Farmers Society was founded in 1815 by both Low Country planters and people who were already living in the upcountry, the Scotch-Irish descendants, because they saw the need for agricultural experimentation to improve crops. They did a lot of experimentation on the different plantations, and they would get together and share their research and their findings. And so in 1826, they purchased what was being built as the new courthouse for the Pendleton District and made that into the Farmers Society Hall. The porticos were added on the front and the back in the 1840s to give it that Greek Revival appearance, but it's just a really significant building in Pendleton, always has been, and actually is the room, the Farmers Society Hall upstairs is where Clemson College was founded. Thomas Clemson was a president and member of the Farmers Society, as was his father-in-law, John C. Calhoun. He started discussions in the society about perhaps funding the founding of a state college for agricultural experimentation. So Clemson, we say, essentially was founded at the upstairs of Farmers Hall in the 1880s.
So let's talk about Woodburn. Walk us through its history and what visitors will see there.
Woodburn was initially built by Charles Cotesworth Pinckney. He served as lieutenant governor of South Carolina, and he was from the powerful Pinckney family of Charleston that at one time was the wealthiest family in the state, based on the indigo and rice that they had produced. Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, who built the house, was the son of General Thomas Pinckney, who was a Revolutionary War general and close associate of George Washington. And his grandmother was Eliza Lucas Pinckney, who was the founder of the indigo production in America. It was built starting about 1828, completed in 1832. And it was built truly as a summer home. You might have several related families who would come up and stay in the summertime and use it as a family hotel. And we have some stories that the children told of the families who lived there. And these were upper-class Charleston families, and they loved to come to Woodburn because they could be children. When they were in the city, when they were among society, they had to be little ladies and gentlemen. But when they came to Woodburn, they could hunt, they could fish, they could go barefoot, they could play outdoors. So those types of things, to me, make that house a very happy place.
What are Ashtabula and Woodburn used for today?
Well, our primary events venue is Woodburn right now, Woodburn Plantation House, and we have weddings and events and parties and things out there. It has an outdoor pavilion. It has an outdoor dance floor, and the grounds can be used. There's a carriage house that can be used for weddings and other events. The house is not usable because it's got a historic collection, so we oftentimes will have that open during a large wedding or something so people can go through it but not actually have the event inside. Ashtabula is primarily our historic house tour site. It can be used for small events, but we typically guide those over toward Woodburn. The collection inside of Ashtabula is all from the families who lived here, so we have to be especially careful with letting people use those. And so it's mainly a house museum. We're also restoring right now the Jenkins House, the William Jenkins House in Pendleton, built in 1837, and it's right in the center of town, and we've been able to get conservation and preservation easements on the house and about 9 acres of land. So that will be a perpetually protected green space in the center of Pendleton for use by the town and for the foundation, and that eventually will become our primary event center for parties and gatherings and meetings.
If you could choose one aspect of both of the two properties that maybe you just really love or that stands out to you, what would it be? Starting with Ashtabula.
I think Ashtabula, the collection inside, is magnificent. The fact that the furniture in here was used by the family, and a lot of it came from the Sword Gates house in Charleston, which was the Adgers City House, magnificent old house that stands in Charleston. I do like the site of Ashtabula on the hilltop here, with the sort of the park in front of it. Woodburn, I think, is my favorite house, though, because of its architectural characteristics. The rooms are so big and airy. It is so light. It is so happy.
So what do you like to do specifically in your free time when you're not looking at insects or touring and helping preserve historic homes?
That's about my free time, is preservation, restoration. I live in a very old house, and so I'm also restoring two other houses. I have one in Pendleton built in 1796 that once I retire, I'm going to restore it. It's sort of preserved now. And I have one in Abbeville that was built as the state arsenal in 1792 that I'm in the process of restoring now. So I spend a lot of time in Abbeville. I do a lot of work with historical associations and historical boards.
So truly your passion.
That's my passion.
Are there any hidden gems or lesser known historical anecdotes about Pendleton that you find particularly fascinating?
We have a real interesting story about a ghost in Hunter's Store. And Hunter's Store is the oldest remaining retail establishment in town. And one of the prominent citizens of Pendleton was known to like the ladies, and he liked to play cards. And so he went down one evening and to visit one of his lady friends and to play cards, and unbeknownst to his wife. And so crossing the creek coming back into Pendleton, he evidently was intoxicated and fell off his horse into the creek, got chilled. Some friends found him, so they took him up into the Hunter's Store so he could dry out in more ways than one before he went home. And he ended up freezing to death that night. It was a very, very cold night in early May, and he froze to death. And so it's said that his ghost haunts the upstairs of the Hunter's Store. And I actually have heard things being dragged across the floor even in the daytime.
Any ghost stories about this home where we are today?
Yes, we actually do ghost tours here in October. They've been really successful because this house is known to be haunted. I must say I have never personally experienced anything in this house other than a feeling of foreboding sometimes at night. I don't like to be here at night by myself. Woodburn, I have actually seen the ghost of Woodburn, and she's a little girl, and I've heard the footsteps in the dining room. So both of our houses are supposedly haunted.
I did not know that. So this area you mentioned, it played a role in the Revolutionary War. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, this actually was it was not legal to settle here during the Revolution. This was all what we call Indian Territory. It was the lower towns of the Cherokee were here. And so you had Seneca Town, which is on the site of Clemson. There were some raids up in here. General Andrew Pickens and General Williamston Williamson led some raids up into the Cherokee villages and pretty much wiped them out, burned the villages, and there were attacks on the white settlements just across the line. The Battle of Seneca was fought at Clemson, and Francis Salvador, who was killed there, was one of the first casualties of the American Revolution, and that was very near Fort Rutledge. That is on the Clemson campus. There's some excavations going on there now to determine exactly what is left of Fort Rutledge, but it probably was the only military engagement within what's currently Anderson, Pickens, and Oconee counties. Our primary connection with the Revolution in the upcountry, in this part of the upcountry, is that we had so many people to move into here after the Revolution to claim bounty land grants. A lot of the soldiers were not paid for their service in the Revolution because the new country was essentially bankrupt. And so instead they were given grants of land in the upcountry and the new Pendleton district that was being opened up in 1784. And so you had people coming from Maryland and Virginia and Pennsylvania and all from down the Great Wagon Road from the Shenandoah Valley, moving into here and claiming land grants as payment for Revolutionary War service.
So there's a lot of development in this area, commercial and residential. How is that affecting the preservation that you guys are working with?
It's a double-edged sword. So the influx of people and development, I think, is a negative, but it can be a positive because some of those people who are coming in do have a real interest in history and help us with the preservation of these buildings and others. And a lot of them are buying historic homes and restoring the homes too. We as a foundation have placed our properties under conservation and preservation easements for the most part. We unfortunately have lost one historic house in Pendleton development in the last month. And that's very unfortunate because it was built about the same time as this one. So you can't protect them all because of private property rights. But we do what we can to protect what we have the money to do. And we encourage others. That our mission as a historic foundation is to protect not only these properties, but to help protect and guide people in protecting other historic properties in the area.
How can visitors to Pendleton get involved with helping to preserve the history of the area?
In many ways. They can volunteer. They can actually join our historic foundation. There are other organizations that they can join. The Central History Museum has an organization. Pickens Historical Society has an organization. And all these organizations preserve history in the area. But if someone wanted to get involved with history, I'd say first contact the Pendleton Historic Foundation. There's a website. We have folks who can guide them in any direction they'd like to go. My generation is getting older, and we're not going to always be able to preserve these places. So I think it's very, very important for parents to get their children involved in history and the love of history, because unless you instill a love of something in a child, they will never have that passion when they're older. Mm-hmm. So I think, if your child is interested in history, take them to historic sites, take them to battlegrounds, take them to places where they can explore and fulfill that desire to be a part of history. And I think that's very, very important going forward.
The Palmetto Porch is produced by Discover South Carolina in partnership with Pod People. To find out more about this town and all the towns featured on our show, visit scpalmettoporch.com.